When Olivia and I moved into our new house 2 years ago, I thought we had it all. The kind of life you read about in magazines, an idyllic neighborhood, a freshly painted picket fence, and a future that stretched out like a sunlit road. I could see us growing old here, hosting family barbecues in the backyard, and watching our kids play on the swings we hadn't installed yet. The Wilsons, our neighbors, were one of the first couples to welcome us. Mike and Emily were in their early 30s, just a few years older than us, with 2 kids who had endless energy. Mike had that effortless charisma that made people gravitate toward him. He was quick with a joke, always offering to help with something, lending tools, giving advice on home repairs, or just showing up with a six-pack to hang out. Emily was equally warm. She and Olivia hit it off immediately, bonding over a shared love of gardening and decorating. It felt good to know we'd found friends, not just neighbors. There was an ease in our connection that made the neighborhood feel even more like home. I remember the first summer barbecue we hosted, a casual get-together with burgers, cold beers, and way too much potato salad. Olivia was the star of the night, flitting between guests, laughing with ease. She had this ability to make everyone feel welcome, like they belonged. Mike was there, of course, manning the grill and tossing jokes at everyone who passed by. I didn't think much of the way Olivia laughed at his jokes or the way they stood shoulder to shoulder as he explained his technique for perfecting steak. Why would I? He was a friend, nothing more. But looking back now, I can see the signs, the way their conversations lingered a little too long, the way her eyes lit up when he spoke. At the time, I chalked it up to her friendly nature. I never imagined there could be anything more. Life continued, and so did our closeness with the Wilsons. Mike started coming over more often, sometimes to help Olivia in the garden, other times just to chat. I didn't mind at first. In fact, I was grateful. With my long hours at work, it was nice to know Olivia had someone to keep her company. It never crossed my mind that their connection could become something dangerous. But then, little things began to change. The changes were subtle at first, easy to dismiss as nothing more than coincidences. Olivia started spending more time in the backyard, her newfound gardening hobby becoming a near obsession. I'd find her out there long after the sun had set, hunched over flower beds with a flashlight, or staring intently at the rows of vegetables she had planted. "It's relaxing," she'd say when I asked about it. "It helps me unwind." At first, I thought nothing of it. If anything, I was glad she had something she was passionate about. But then I started noticing how often Mike was there with her, offering advice, bringing over seeds or tools, and laughing at jokes that seemed to stay between the two of them. One Saturday, I came home from a long shift at work and found Olivia and Mike sitting on the back patio. They were drinking iced tea, their heads bent together as they examined her notebook of garden plans. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unnoticed, watching the way she smiled at him, the kind of smile that used to be reserved for me. "Hey," I said, stepping outside. Both of them jumped slightly, as if caught off guard. "Nick. You're home early," Olivia said, her voice bright but slightly strained. "Yeah, figured I'd take the afternoon off," I replied, my eyes flicking to Mike. "Didn't realize we had company." Mike grinned, his usual easy charm on full display. "Just helping Olivia figure out what to plant next season. You've got yourself a serious gardener here." "Yeah," I said, my tone flat. "Looks like it." The tension in the air was palpable, but I didn't push it. Instead, I watched as Mike made his excuses to leave, waving cheerfully as he walked back to his yard. Olivia stayed outside, fiddling with her notebook, avoiding my gaze. The first real argument came a few days later. I had been replaying that afternoon in my head, unable to shake the unease that had taken root. That night, as we lay in bed, I finally decided to bring it up. "You and Mike seem pretty close these days," I said, my voice casual but pointed. Olivia tensed beside me. "He's our neighbor, Nick. Of course we're close." "Yeah, but don't you think it's a little much?" I pressed. "You're out there with him all the time." She sighed, rolling onto her side to face me. "He's just being helpful. You know how he is, he loves giving advice. Why are you making this a thing?" "I'm not," I said, though my tone betrayed me. "It just feels like you're spending more time with him than with me." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Maybe if you were around more, you'd see that's not true." The word stung, but I didn't respond. I turned over, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with a mix of anger and sadness. Was she right? Had I been too distant? Or was she just deflecting? Over the next few weeks, my suspicions grew harder to ignore. Olivia became more secretive, her phone always locked and tucked away. She started going out for walks in the evenings, coming back later than she used to. When I asked where she'd been, her answers were vague: errands, catching up with friends, things that didn't quite add up. And then there was the block party. The block party was an annual tradition, a chance for everyone to let loose and catch up before the chaos of the school year began. Olivia looked stunning that night, her smile as radiant as ever as she floated through the crowd. I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as I watched her, but that pride quickly turned to unease when I saw her with Mike. They were standing by the grill, laughing at something I couldn't hear. She leaned in, her hand lightly brushing his arm as she spoke. He said something back, and she threw her head back in laughter, the kind of laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. I clenched my jaw, the knot in my stomach tightening. It was friendly. Too friendly. Later that evening, as we cleaned up, I decided to address it. "You and Mike seem to be having a good time tonight," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She glanced at me, her smile fading slightly. "He was just telling me about a funny story from work." "Why?" "You tell me," I said, my voice sharp. "You've been spending a lot of time with him lately." She set down the stack of plates she was holding, her eyes flashing with annoyance. "Nick, this is getting ridiculous. Mike is our neighbor. A friend. That's all. Then why do I feel like I'm being left out?" I shot back. "Why does it feel like there's something going on?" Her face softened, but her tone remained defensive. "I don't know what to tell you. Maybe you're reading into things because you've been so busy. But there's nothing going on, Nick. I swear." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the doubt was there now, and it refused to let go. That night, as Olivia slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Was I imagining things? Or was the life I thought I knew slipping away right in front of me? The unease in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. Every interaction between Olivia and Mike, no matter how seemingly innocent, felt like another thread unraveling in the fabric of our lives. The way they laughed together, the way their conversations lingered longer than they should, it was starting to suffocate me. I began noticing things I hadn't before. Her phone, once left casually on the coffee table, was now always face down or in her pocket. She'd smile at texts she didn't share with me, and when I asked who it was, her answers were always vague. "Just Emily," she'd say, or "work stuff, nothing interesting." But it wasn't just her behavior. Mike had started avoiding me in subtle ways. He stopped inviting me over for beers, no longer waved as enthusiastically when he saw me in the driveway. It was as if my presence made him uncomfortable, and that discomfort only fueled my suspicions. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Olivia had told me she was going out to run errands. It was something she did often, and normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. But this time, something about her demeanor felt off, her rushed goodbye, the way she avoided meeting my eyes. I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left, then got in my car and drove, keeping a safe distance. My heart pounded as I tailed her through the quiet streets of our neighborhood and into town. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was about to feel like a fool for doubting her. But I couldn't stop. She pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe, one we used to frequent together. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her get out of the car and walk toward the entrance. She wasn't alone. Mike was there, waiting for her. They hugged briefly before heading inside. I sat in my car, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to storm into the cafe, to demand answers right then and there. But another part of me, the part that was terrified of what I might hear, kept me frozen in place. I watched them through the window, their heads bent close together as they talked, their expressions animated. It didn't look like two neighbors casually catching up. It looked like something much more. When they finally left, I waited until they were out of sight before driving home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The anger and betrayal burned in my chest, but so did the doubt. Was this really what it seemed? Or was I jumping to conclusions? That evening, I couldn't keep it inside any longer. "Where were you today?" I asked as Olivia came in the door, a shopping bag in hand. She hesitated, her expression flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "Running errands," like I said, she replied, setting the bag down on the counter. "Really?" I said, crossing my arms. "Because I thought I saw you at the cafe. With Mike." Her face paled, and she froze mid-step. "Nick. I can explain." "Then explain," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Because from where I was sitting, it looked a lot like you were sneaking around with him." "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice pleading. "We were just talking. That's all." "Talking about what?" I demanded. "Why couldn't you talk to him here? Why all the secrecy?" She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, her shoulders slumping as tears filled her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "I swear, Nick. It got out of control." "What got out of control?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the quiet house. "Just say it, Olivia. Tell me the truth." She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the air leave my lungs as I stared at her, my world crumbling around me. "So it's true," I said, my voice hollow. "You and Mike, you've been having an affair." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "It's over," she said quickly. "It's been over for weeks. I ended it because I knew it was wrong. I knew I couldn't lose you." "Over?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You think that makes it better? You think that erases what you've done?" "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I love you, Nick. I've always loved you." Her words felt like poison. I turned away, unable to look at her. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't do this right now." That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling as her confession played on a loop in my mind. The woman I had built my life with, the one I had trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me. And the man she had betrayed me with was someone I had called a friend. The betrayal felt like a double-edged sword, cutting deeper with every thought. But as much as I wanted to hate her, a part of me still loved her. And that realization hurt most of all. The days following Olivia's confession were a blur of anger, sadness, and confusion. The life I thought we had, the love, the trust, felt like a cruel joke now. Every corner of the house seemed to mock me, from the framed wedding photo on the mantel to the throw pillows she'd picked out for the couch. I couldn't escape the memories, the constant reminders of what we'd lost. Olivia tried to reach me, but I avoided her. I slept on the couch, left the house early in the mornings, and stayed out late. When she tried to talk to me, I shut her down. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies, to face the pain she'd caused. Her texts became desperate. "Olivia, please, Nick, just talk to me. I know I've hurt you, but I love you. I don't want to lose us. Olivia, I've made an appointment for therapy. I'll go alone or with you, whatever you want. Just, please don't give up on me. Olivia, I'm sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if you let me. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Her words felt hollow, like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. She might have ended the affair, but the damage had been done. The trust we built over years was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. The anger in my chest needed an outlet, and there was one person I hadn't confronted yet, Mike. The thought of seeing him, of facing the man I'd once called a friend, filled me with equal parts dread and rage. But I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I needed him to feel the weight of what he'd done. I showed up at his house unannounced one evening, my fists clenched as I knocked on the door. When he opened it, his face paled, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. "Nick," he said finally, his voice hesitant. I was going to call you." "Save it," I snapped, pushing past him into the living room. "We need to talk. Now." He closed the door, his shoulders slumping as he turned to face me. "I know you're angry," he said, his voice low. "And you have every right to be. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, my voice rising. "You betrayed me, Mike. You betrayed my trust, my marriage, my life. And for what? What the hell were you thinking?" He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "I wasn't thinking," he said finally. "I was selfish. I let my feelings get in the way, and I didn't think about the consequences." "Feelings?" I repeated bitterly. "What feelings? You're my friend. You're married. You're supposed to be better than this." "I know," he said, his voice trembling. "I hate myself for what I did, Nick. I can't take it back, but I'm sorry. For everything." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said coldly. "You destroyed everything. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt Emily, too. You threw away your family for what? A fling?" He flinched at my words, his face crumpling. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I don't even forgive myself." "Good," I said sharply. "Because I never will." I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. The confrontation had given me no relief, no closure. If anything, it only made the betrayal feel more real. When I got home, Olivia was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "I went to see him," I said, dropping onto the couch. I needed to hear it from him. Her face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Nick, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know I've ruined everything, but I still love you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I looked at her, my chest heavy with a mix of anger and sadness. "You can't fix this, Olivia," I said. "Not by yourself. Trust isn't something you can patch up overnight. And right now, I don't even know if I want to try." Her sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The pain was too fresh, the wound too deep. I stood up and walked into the bedroom, leaving her alone with her regret. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't stay. The house, the neighborhood, the life we built, it was all tainted now. If I had any hope of healing, I needed to leave. I needed space, distance, and time to figure out who I was without her. The next morning, I began packing my things. Olivia didn't stop me. She stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears as she watched me fold clothes into a suitcase. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know yet," I said, not meeting her eyes. "But I can't stay here." "Nick, please," she said, stepping closer. "We can work through this. We can go to therapy, take time to rebuild. Don't give up on us. I looked at her, my chest tight with a mix of love and anger. I'm not giving up, I said. I just need time. And I can't find it here. Her tears spilled over, but she nodded, stepping back to let me pass. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was taking the first step toward healing, and sadness for the life we'd lost. Leaving the house wasn't just a physical act, it was a symbolic one. Walking out that door, suitcase in hand, felt like closing the chapter on the life I'd once known. I moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place I would have never imagined myself living in just a few months earlier. The walls were bare, the furniture mismatched, and the kitchen smelled faintly of paint. But it was mine. For the first time in years, I had a space where I could be alone with my thoughts, away from the shadows of betrayal. At first, the silence was unbearable. The absence of Olivia's laughter, the sound of her humming as she cooked dinner, even the faint clinking of her tea mug in the mornings, it all haunted me. I found myself scrolling through old photos late at night, torturing myself with memories of a life that no longer felt real. Her smile, once a source of comfort, now felt like a lie. The days stretched into weeks, and while the anger began to fade, it left behind something heavier, grief. Grief for the woman I'd loved, for the marriage I'd cherished, for the future I thought we were building together. It wasn't just Olivia I was mourning, it was the version of myself who had trusted so completely, who had believed so wholeheartedly in us. One night, as I stared at the ceiling in the dim light of my apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire, my sister. "Claire, how are you holding up?" I hesitated before responding. Claire had always been my rock, the one person who could cut through my defenses without effort. But even she didn't fully understand the depth of what I was going through. I'm getting by. Some days are better than others. Her reply came almost immediately. "Claire, I think you should talk to someone. Like a therapist. It helped me after the divorce, Nick. It might help you too." I stared at the screen, her words sinking in. The idea of therapy had always seemed foreign to me, something other people did when their lives spiraled out of control. But maybe that was the point. My life had spiraled out of control, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. I made the call the next morning. Dr. Howard's office was small but welcoming, with soft lighting and a bookshelf filled with titles I'd never heard of. She was calm and patient, her demeanor putting me at ease even as I stumbled through my story. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore," I admitted during one of our early sessions. "For so long, my identity was tied to Olivia, to our marriage. And now, it's gone." Dr. Howard nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's natural to feel that way after a betrayal," she said. "You're grieving not just the loss of your relationship, but the loss of the life you thought you had. But grief doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're healing." Her words stayed with me long after I left the office. Grief wasn't a prison, it was a process. And if I was willing to face it, maybe I could find a way to move forward. Over the next few months, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but little by little, I found pieces of myself that I thought I'd lost. I started going to the gym again, pushing my body in ways that reminded me of its strength. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects that reignited my sense of purpose. And I found comfort in small, unexpected moments, watching the sunset from my apartment window, reading a book cover to cover, making my own decisions without having to consider anyone else. Olivia reached out a few times, her texts carefully worded and filled with apologies. I read them, but I never replied. I wasn't ready to talk to her, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. Her regret didn't erase the choices she'd made, and I couldn't carry the weight of her guilt along with my own pain. Mike, on the other hand, was a ghost. After our confrontation, I didn't hear from him again. Emily had left him, taking the kids and moving in with her sister. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he was living alone now, trying to piece together a life he'd shattered with his own hands. I felt no sympathy for him, only a sense of relief that he was finally out of my life. One afternoon, I ran into Emily at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart with her youngest child in the seat, her face tired but determined. When she saw me, her expression softened, and she gave me a small, sad smile. "Nick," she said, stopping her cart. "It's good to see you." "You too," I said, meaning it. "How are you holding up?" She sighed, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted. "But I think we're finally starting to find our footing. The kids are adjusting, and I'm figuring things out." I nodded, understanding all too well. "You're stronger than you think," I said. "You've been through hell, but you're still standing. That says a lot." "So are you," she replied, her eyes kind. "What they did to us says more about them than it ever will about us." Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways. For so long, I had let their betrayal define me, let it dictate how I saw myself and my future. But maybe Emily was right. Maybe it was time to stop looking backward and start imagining what came next. That night, as I stood on my balcony watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. My life wasn't perfect, and it wasn't what I had planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. A year had passed since I left the house and the life that Olivia and I had built. Time had softened the edges of the pain, though the memories of betrayal still lingered like shadows on the edge of my mind. But the man I was now, the man standing in front of the mirror in my small but cozy apartment, felt stronger, wiser, and more certain of his worth. The calendar on the wall marked a new year, a fresh start. I'd spent the holidays quietly, reflecting on how far I'd come. There had been no dramatic reunions, no grand resolutions to fix what was broken. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance of the past and a cautious hope for the future. The greatest lesson I'd learned was that healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy, unpredictable, and full of setbacks. There were days when I felt invincible, like I could take on the world. And then there were days when the weight of what had happened threatened to pull me under. But through it all, I had learned to trust myself again. To make decisions not out of fear or anger, but out of a genuine desire to move forward. Therapy had helped me find the tools to process the pain, but it was the small, everyday victories, making new friends, tackling a challenging project at work, exploring new hobbies, that truly made me feel whole again. One afternoon, while browsing a local bookstore, I bumped into Emily again. She looked different this time, more relaxed, her face glowing with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She was holding a book on photography, something she mentioned wanting to pursue back when we first met. "Emily," I said, smiling. "Twice in 1 year. Are you following me?" She laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I could ask you the same thing. How are you, Nick?" "I'm good," I said, meaning it. "Really good. And you?" "Better," she admitted, tucking the book under her arm. "It hasn't been easy, but I think I'm finally starting to figure out who I am without him." "That makes two of us," I said. "Feels good, doesn't it?" She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "It does. It really does." That chance encounter turned into coffee, which turned into long conversations about life, healing, and the paths we were both carving out of the wreckage. Emily and I didn't rush anything. We both knew we needed time and space to fully heal before opening ourselves to something new. But there was a connection between us that couldn't be ignored, a bond forged not just in shared pain, but in a mutual determination to rebuild. Months later, as spring rolled in, I found myself sitting on my balcony with Emily beside me. We watched the sunset in comfortable silence, her hand resting lightly on mine. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, and it wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The betrayal that had once defined my life was no longer the central story. It was a chapter, painful, yes, but necessary for growth. I had learned that even in the darkest moments, there was a way forward. And though the scars would always remain, they were a reminder of my resilience, of the strength it took to build something new. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and orange, I turned to Emily and smiled. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was ready,